Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. I'm here today with Joi Cuartero, Senior Program Officer for Economic Vitality at Main Street America. Whew, that's quite a title, Joi. Did I get it correct?
You got it right. Yeah. And that's really just fancy for I get to work with our really cool network here at Main Street America, lots of local communities and our coordinating programs. So that's the fancy version of saying I work with all these really cool people.
Awesome. Well, tell us about some of those really cool people or communities that you get to work with.
Yeah, so at Main Street America, I'm kind of part of what we call our field team. So we do get to go on the ground. The Main Street America network itself is about 1,200 communities across the nation. And really, it's just that they follow our Main Street approach to economic development for either historic downtowns or maybe neighborhood commercial districts. And then we've also got what we call coordinating programs across the network. And basically, that's either maybe statewide, maybe it's a countywide program, sometimes cities. Essentially, they're sort of also boots on the ground, helping those local communities build capacity. So we get called in, and depending on what it is that community needs, we sort of help out. So maybe it's staff training or board trainings, committee trainings, that kind of thing. Or it can also be strategy development or working with their, small business community through like strengthening those ecosystems. So yeah, we're just kind of there to help support. But essentially, yeah, that's really what I get to do is I get to sort of travel our network and work with cool people.
That's great. I serve on the as vice president now of the Downtown Frederick Partnership Board in Frederick, Maryland. So that's the Main Street here in our community where the PPR office is headquartered. And yes, I think that the Main Street, I've always believed this my career in economic development, that it really starts there at that neighborhood, uber local level. And I love that piece. And I love that the support that Main Street America is able to provide.
Yeah, most definitely. And we for sure, and it is kind of nice because our staff is sort of located all over. But it's not necessarily that we have like a region or anything. We definitely lean into each other's expertise, and it just sort of depends on what that community is doing. But I think you're right. In the end, it's all about the local folks that are there, kind of the market conditions that are going on. So we really just try to meet them where they're at, and then bring them to whatever that next level is, I guess. But hopefully not so far away into the distant future. We try to give them some things that they can work on, throughout the year, and maybe keep that timeline a little tighter because there's so much that goes on.
Yeah, we have been able to work with a number of different main streets in the region, Virginia, Maryland, and kind of mid-Atlantic. And it is interesting seeing them at different stages. Some really well developed, the Downtown Frederick Partnership. Oh my gosh, I should know how many years. It's been a couple that they've been around. And then others are brand new, trying to start up their own Main Street, and working through that at the state level and the national level is pretty awesome because it can be daunting for a volunteer or, one paid staff person to try to get all of this work done. And we always tell them that you just can't do it yourself. It's not possible. You have to ask for help. You have to get people in your community engaged and willing to support. What other little bits of advice do you like to give some of those?
No, I mean, I was just thinking, because is Middleton part of like kind of the
Middle
Tell me why.
Middletown, Maryland.
Middletown. Okay,
Mhm,
Middletown. Yes.
mhm,
Okay. So
mhm.
this is very coincidental, but I happen to have sort of a one-on-one with them on some economic vitality stuff, and I guess like the other advice that I give is yes, absolutely, the work is not something that's done alone. I think oftentimes you have a lot of different organizations that are working on various parts of economic development, but people ask me all the time, who can we compare ourselves to, or who's doing it really well? And it really is those communities that are working together in those partnerships that you were talking about. But I guess like the thing that I'm also thinking of is when it comes to those traditional practices that we have in economic development, like how can we really kind of like right scale it for where we are in our communities, right? So thinking about that one-on-one, with that community, it's going to be different than any other community maybe within that county, your county, right? So Middleton, when we were talking, we were specifically kind of referring to like business retention efforts, and that's going to look different, there than it is somewhere else. But you can use very much the same types of practices. You just have to kind of like really just have that best understanding of your community to get there.
Yeah, you're right. That's great advice, figuring out how to take a national best practice or something that you learn at a conference or something that you learn talking to your neighbor and how to apply that in a truly genuine and authentic way that your your business is there on Main Street and your residents on Main Street want to engage and participate and to help them to grow. So yeah, that's I love that. We did recently finish we've done some technical assistance support programs for Main Street Middletown. Really love Becky and that community. She's got a nice product out there. It's a great little
Yeah,
place.
definitely. Well, yeah, and I think it's really cool because they're about to kind of come into some iterations of like just new uses maybe, or like the next generation, which is always exciting, but then sometimes a little tense. I think when you get new people involved, new businesses or new property owners. So I think it's exciting when those transitions happen. Like hopefully then organizations that are there to support have kind of what they need to continue that vision, right? Whatever the momentum is and the vision that they have, we're all about building those relationships so that we can really communicate well together and kind of row in that same direction. Because as you know, everyone always has a different idea about how to get there, but we all usually have the same thing in mind.
We do all have opinions, don't we? It's
Yeah,
funny. Mhm.
for sure.
I'd love to take a step back because, so our listeners are able to submit questions, and oftentimes we get questions about, transitioning roles and stuff like that. And so you have not been with Main Street America for that long. So tell me, kind of what you were doing before and how it has applied, how you took, kind of your knowledge and skills and are applying it out in the community.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I kind of started, I think we all kind of come to economic development in various ways. I was working on like a community art center and kind of helped found this art center in our community. Didn't really know what that was in terms of community development or economic development, but was able to form like a public private partnership to get that done. And that actually led me to being the executive director for Batavia Main Street, which is a suburb of Chicago. So about 45 minutes west of Chicago. So that's kind of where I guess I got, I planted some roots and then kind of got some experience in that. It's always good to do that. I think, be involved when at whatever age when you're young and just dive in, right? Just don't take no for an answer and just get some stuff done with folks that like to roll up their sleeves and make things happen. But that actually did give me like the what I needed to then. I moved to Quincy and Adams County, Illinois. So now we're on the far west central part of the state on the Mississippi River. We actually border Missouri, so a very different kind of community. So suburbs of Chicago to, I wouldn't necessarily call it rural. It's just that we are surrounded probably by rural, but we are kind of the big small town. So I did economic development for Quincy and Adams County, and I was their marketing communications director. But really, I mean, again, with sort of like those big small towns, or maybe in most communities, you just always wear all the hats. So we were really working on some good projects to bring in, and there were a lot of different sectors now that I could kind of get my hands dirty in. So not just the downtown district, but of course, sort of out by our mall and the highway and some of our more industrial parks. And we have a very active river. So there's a lot of, river and barge traffic. So it was just a really cool, interesting way to see how all of those pieces blend and how, it's not like an either or, because I think sometimes that happens in communities as well. People think, oh, we need to be working on our big, commercial space buildings or our industrial park. But, you kind of need all parts of the community clicking. So that's kind of where I could see how when we can strengthen certain parts of the community and resource them well, the other parts also would thrive. And then that's what kind of led me back to Main Street, because I really did have a passion for small business. And not just small business, but maybe bringing some of that perspective to Main Street and vice versa, advocate for it. So I actually sit on the IEDC board as well. And I think part of that is also letting them know, we do have to make sure that some of the practices that we have can be very transferable in different segments of a community, and that we do need to provide resources for different parts of the community. And sometimes I think rural also gets a little bit left out of that conversation. So how do we advocate for that? But yeah, I think it's just been a cool journey because everything kind of has led from one part to the next, and just hopefully helped me provide a good perspective when I go into these different communities now, and provide whatever that expertise they might be needing at the moment.
That's awesome. It is always fun to hear different people's kind of trajectory in economic development and what that looks like. And yes, it sounds like you've found your place, at least for the moment, which is a beautiful thing. And being able to connect with so many across the country.
Yeah, we are growing. It's been kind of a wild ride to see. I think when I started, I like to tease we could all fit on one Zoom screen, and now you got to scroll a little to see all the staff, which is cool. But yes, I think that it's been good because we are able to, again, expand some of those resources. And on that national scale, it is different because obviously every community is different. So you're not just focused on kind of one data set or one group of, community engagement. You really have to tell the story of each community to make sure that you're creating that good through line for them to get to action, which is a lot of the stuff that we're doing.
And thinking about IEDC and Main Street America, how do you keep up with and maintain all of these different contacts and networks and kind of help to connect the dots for yourself and then ultimately others? Any tips for the listeners?
Man, a really good calendar, relying on technology. No, it's hard. It is hard. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of difficult to make sure that we even sometimes remember that oh yeah, my colleague went there for this progress visit and we learned these things, and then people are changing all the time too in terms of leadership and things like that. So I think for us anyway, we've been really trying to lean more into tech, and try to develop a really more robust, I think, almost like CRM system for ourselves, right? So that we can sort of see some of those touch points. But I do think that that's the unique part about Main Street America. Well, there's a lot of things. One in particular thing that I think is unique is that network again. So hopefully we have some of our other partners in the coordinating programs, for instance, that can also kind of help us make those connections. Because I think leaning into those partners that are again on either that statewide or countywide or citywide level that are sort of working with those neighborhoods and those districts and communities, I think that's always been helpful to just make sure that they're kind of also there alongside us, because we're not always going to be there. And, we kind of come in with recommendations, let's say, but they're the ones that are doing the work. So hopefully there's a way to always continue to provide that connection and through line with those other partners. So, but yeah, it isn't super easy. I think we all have a really hard time, and we all live maybe by our calendars these days, and just trying to to maintain.
Yeah, the calendars and yes, the CRMs, whether it's a formal process or an informal, thing or my gosh, the number of times I'll go through LinkedIn and my messages to see when did I meet them? Where was it? When did we connect? It might like help me to narrow down and remember some nuances, which
Yeah.
is always silly.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and that's the other thing, right? Lots of people like to communicate in various different ways, so it is a lot to keep track of. I always just try to like lead people in one direction. So if I've got multiple different communities that I'm doing survey in or something like that, for instance, I just tell everyone if you would like an update, please contact me and do it on a Friday, and then that way you're guaranteed to get an answer. But otherwise, we might not be able to get back to you. So that, it's setting those expectations and building those relationships.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Oftentimes, some of the conversations that we have is about that upward mobility and being open for new opportunities. I'm curious what kind of career advice, as somebody who has worked in a couple of different organizations, which is great to have that type of experience. I'm curious if you have any advice for people that are looking to for ways to continue to grow in economic development.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about this often. There's no like clear path actually for us, right? We don't really have a clear path. So I think we all find ourselves in economic development in various ways. But I also think that that's cool because the field is also very broad. So it kind of is an ability for you to, get a taste in some way, shape, or form, and then find that passion, and then really lean into it. So whether it's economic development through the arts or tourism, whether it's economic development through site selection things, whether it's even through utilities, and so there's always such different ways to get into it. But I do think that in general, we find ourselves also not always in very large organizations. It's small, kind of like one. Sometimes it's one staff, sometimes it's just a few people that are working. So to me, I think to continue that type of mobility, I always look at just continuing to lean into those strengths, the assets of what you're doing, the community, and what's happening, and build organizational capacity through that. Because even if it's not necessarily, even if it's you're always going to be the president and CEO of something, I think that growing the organization and building that capacity and the people and the support that you need to get the work done, to me, that's kind of upward mobility because you're able to then take on some pretty big projects, even if you're a small outfit. Just leverage the strengths that the community has in order to kind of like forge that path, let's say. So I feel like, again, with some of our smaller organizations, just those incremental steps are very important, and not to always get kind of lost in like, again, the vision for like 10 or 20 years that might be there, because it is a little daunting. But what are some of those other things that can happen in the now where you can do more? I had a colleague that likes to use strategic doing versus just strategic planning. So yeah, how can you get some of those things done sort of quickly and show the progress? Because there's a lot to celebrate in successes that happen, but we don't always take that time. We get to the end of something, we're like, oh yeah, we made it. But we don't always kind of continue to inform and demonstrate the impact of an organization and what it has so that we can continue to build capacity in staff or in funding.
Okay, well, I love the strategic doing. We're working on a kind of an organizational plan with a community right now, and it's tricky coming up with, kind of co-creating these realistic 1 and 2 year goals that can work within budget and human resource capacity, and what does that look like? So um, literally I was working with the team over the weekend trying to get this nailed down and almost done and out, ready to get out the door, because there is no like templated plan that you can do for every community and just say just do these things. It has to be customized and appropriate. Every community has elements of resistance, so figuring out how you're going to get past those obstacles to get some work done, but not getting too caught up in it.
Yeah, I like that. Elements of resistance. I enjoy that term.
Well,
Because
I'm stealing the strategic doing because that is
yeah,
awesome. Again, nobody wants to have a strategic plan or marketing plan that's going to sit on. Nobody wants a plan, period. That's just going to sit on the shelf. So, you know, yeah, we like Google Docs and full integration with like your working spreadsheet and all of your things, so that everything can be connected and you're not just doing it yourself and it's sitting as a book, as a pretty book on the paper on the bookshelf. So that's
absolutely.
great. I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe some best practices that you are seeing or hearing, as ways to kind of position and ready. And that can be anything from that small startup community that's just trying to get themselves off the ground, or some even a community that's been around for a while and maybe has new team members, that are trying to next level. Any thoughts or advice in that space?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that in Main Street, we kind of love our frameworks. So and I think economic development, we have a lot of jargon in the end, right? There's a lot of like jargony words and acronyms, and there's all this stuff. But in Main Street, we have our own. So, for instance, I think that some of the best practices, and I kind of said it a little bit, are those incremental steps or those ways to kind of like break down the work that's happening. And in Main Street, so we have our 4-point approach, is we call it the Main Street approach or the 4-point approach, and it's basically breaking down things that are happening within a district, in promotions, organization, design, and economic vitality. So that's kind of like the jargon that we like to use to break down that work. And each of those things kind of, your design is kind of like a sense of creating a sense of place. Your promotions, it's that sense of community and organization, that sense of ownership, because it really does come from like the community itself. And then in economic vitality, that sense of vitality. So I think that the first best practice to me is like getting a little bit organized in that way. And it doesn't have to be our jargon, but just in some way where you can kind of like piece again together the work that's happening and then kind of see it broadly so that you can start to understand then, okay, am I just doing this promotion or event or activity or what have you just to do it, or is there like a reason that I'm doing it? Is there some, is it really to help our small businesses out and make sure that there's foot traffic, not just that the day of something like a small business event, but is it like helping throughout the week? So how are we also just being strategic with that work? But I think breaking it down first is really important. And then we have another framework that we basically, it's our accreditation standards for communities. But like, even if you're not a community that is going through our accreditation process, it's truly just best practices for an organization. So again, those two frameworks to me are important in terms of best practices, because one is about the program like the programming that happens within an organization, and the other is about the organization itself and like strengthening that organization. So in the accreditation standards, it's more about do we have diversified funding? Do we have a strategy that kind of leads the work that we're doing? Are we making sure that we're demonstrating those impacts and results? And and how do we actually look at success, and what does success mean to us as an organization? So we do break it down in those ways, but I do think, like, again, keeping it smaller and bite-sized and understanding that those incremental steps are totally wins to get to whatever the big thing is. I think that that's important for organizations to understand, because again, there's a lot that happens in the day-to-day that are leading you to some of those bigger retention or recruitment projects, and ways to, again, be the balance in the community so that your section that you're working on is thriving, which helps the other parts grow.
I'm curious. I know. You'll find the more we get to know each other, you'll find my heart, goes to the small communities and the small organizations and stuff like that. And I'm curious. I know. So oftentimes that's what my questions are centered around. But I'm curious about, maybe advice or coaching or something that exists to get that solo or small team, to make some of those incremental changes and to not get overwhelmed with the idea that I've got 4 points, I've got 4 things I can get done. Like, am I supposed to devote a day a week to these different areas? Like, what is it that How should I be doing that? So I'm curious if you've got advice or thoughts in that space.
Well, in the end, again, kind of going back to, I know we were sort of joking, like we live by our calendars, but sometimes that's true. I think first and foremost, we actually have to give ourselves permission to like plan and permission to like stop and maybe even like, take that step back to like uh, look at who our partners are that we can also bring to the table. Because again, when you said at the beginning, this work is a lot and there's room for everybody. There's so much that has to be done, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one organization that's working in the field is the expert in that or should be doing programming for that. In a lot of my ecosystem work, well, when we're trying to like look at how communities are better serving their small businesses, for instance, we find that there are a lot of gaps or inefficiencies. And oftentimes it's just that, unfortunately, because there's so many separate organizations, they don't always talk to each other about the stuff that's going on. But if we could find that time to give ourselves permission to plan and kind of, again, take that step back, I think that we will find that there are ways to really look at, okay, not everyone has to, for instance, do like opening up a small business 101, in our community. We can have one person that's like, here's how to do a business plan, and here's how to get ready for that bank meeting, and then here's how to, make sure that you've got a marketing plan to go along with that business plan. So you can have different organizations maybe taking on a piece of the overall like 101 course, let's say. But there's ways to kind of but the way I think to get there is that we do have to like plan it, put it in your calendar, make sure that you don't just spend the day working on the little details to get to something that of course is still super important, because everything's always important. But how can we make sure that we are dedicating that time to plan with folks?
I love that, actually. It's, yes, permission to sit down. This, because you're right, we're not all just machines here to crank out this work, and that's where burnout comes from. That's where, frustration and all of these other areas. Um, Last week I met we have a new marketing coordinator for the local chamber. We've got a new, marketing person coming on with the city Department of Economic Development, a new marketing person that's there with the county Department of Economic Development, and relatively new with our Main Street. And so I said, and they're all doing marketing. And I said to one of them the other on Thursday, Friday last week, I said, you need to get them all together. You need to get everybody together to find out, and if nothing else, just to meet each other, but then figure out those things. What is a project that you're working on, or what is a software package that you guys pay for, that, within licensing regulations, you could share, you could partner with others in the community in this ecosystem for greater support. So I love that. But I threw out this idea and then I left. I was literally running down the street. So now I'm thinking, hey, I need to follow up a little bit and give the person that I threw this idea bomb to and said, oh, actually, let me help you, help you connect those dots and figure
Yeah.
out who these other players are in the
No,
space.
that's so true. And I think that we have to, we do organizational planning, right? And often we are doing our own, say, succession or transition planning, hopefully, because that's another thing, right? We don't always do that because we're not thinking about that. We're not thinking about when we might be, exiting, for someone else to take that spot. But yeah, so succession planning, transition planning, and then onboarding. So those are kind of like those key moments, I think, that are like stressful for organizations and stressful for your partners as well, because you don't know who's coming in next. You don't know if the relationship's going to be the same. And especially for communities that they've got really good partnerships and strong collaborations, I always say, like, do a succession plan for like your partners and your collaborators, because again, how do you codify relationships? It's very difficult. But if you try to build it in the culture of each of the organizations, that when someone, is exiting, that they know the role of this organization and the expectations in this whether it's marketing as a whole, or again, helping your small business owners, or, promoting other economic development tools and resources. How are we making sure that when the one person does kind of leave, and someone else is there, that we're all still communicating, and you've just built that really positive culture. Which is, it's easier said than done, but I think something to think about, right? Like, at least if it's on our minds and we're sort of like promising this to each other as organization stakeholders, hopefully it'll be easier the next time.
Yes, I agree. It is much easier to say and for us to, record this episode and people to listen to be like, oh, yep, I get it. I don't have time. Well, I guess, giving you permission to make time and to figure out these priorities, some of these priorities. That succession planning, my gosh, succession planning on Main Street, it could be an entire 8 blog series on how we support businesses that do and don't think about this stuff. Family businesses that transition over, and what does that look like? So we are not going to go down that rabbit hole
Yeah,
today.
no, that's too much. Yeah,
But I do love that conversation and kind of figuring out how to support our neighbors. So
for sure.
cool. I think I might just kind of shift into more of a wrap up. So, Joy, I'm always curious when you seek to come onto a podcast. I know I reached out to you, but when you were coming on, were you thinking, oh, I hope Sandy asks me about such and such? Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Oh gosh.
About you, about your career, about anything? I am going to ask you about your EDO breakthrough, but or just your economic development breakthrough. But anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, it's always nice to just get to know a new group of people that are, interested in the field. And we kind of touched on that there's not necessarily this like direct pathway. And I know that's something that we think about often when we're in this field, is like, how do we get other people involved and, make it more clear, I guess, like if this is something that's for them. But, I am grateful, I think, to have, I guess, fallen into this space, because it really is such a cool, diverse area to work in, and again, I think that you're able to really find ways to like lean into things that you're passionate in, and just find those people around you to support and make those things happen. Again, we live in a place where the way to get to something, probably there's 1,000 different directions that you can go in, but if everyone could sit around that table and just kind of agree on like the outcome, I think that communities have a better shot at just kind of getting to that next step, whatever it may be. So I just it's really awesome that there's a place for people to go that are just interested in the vitality of their communities, and then hopefully glean some of this stuff, because I feel like the things that we talked about, it's like you could go so deep into any of those topics, and that could be a whole other conversation. So I'm just thank you so much for having me on, and hopefully something in the future.
Yeah, I think we just teed you up for like three more interviews, and we'll just give ourselves like some really specific topics that we
Well,
will,
yeah.
that's awesome. So as I said a moment ago, I always like to find out, our podcast is the EDO Breakthrough. If there was that aha moment in economic development, I think our listeners would love to hear yours.
Yeah. For me, in the end, honestly, it was that whole, oh my goodness, I do not have to do it all. There are people and partners that I can lean on in order to get the stuff done. And there's a lot of really passionate people that love to, I think, roll up their sleeves and make those things happen. And I think that in general, when we try to like continue to build bigger and bigger tables so that more people can be at it, I think the better. I think diversity in thought and how to get to some of those solutions is what can make things a little bit, I don't know, more resilient for the future, I suppose, because you just have more people that are part of your community, making something happen. So just don't ever think that it's like a solo thing. We don't have to die on a hill to get there. There's plenty of people that can be there to kind of, push ideas up and make them happen.
Yes, diversity of thought. That's going to be in another one of our future podcast discussions. And how can we lean in there? So, Joy, thank you. I'm hoping that our listeners you'll be able to share some, LinkedIn, email, website, stuff like that, and we'll drop it into the show notes for our listeners that want to follow up with you. And
Yeah,
yay. With that, I would just like to say thank you. Thank you for joining today. It was awesome to get to know and hear your story a little bit.
appreciate it. Thank you.
The EDO Breakthrough podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.